Hello, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to the very first Service Desk Institute podcast. I'm your host, Scarlett, Industry Analyst at SDI, and my first ever podcast guest is Scott Lake from ESP Global Services. ESP are a managed service provider for airport systems, and they deliver global IT solutions delivered by local experts anywhere in the world 24/7. I've known Scott for a little while, and I first met him when he spoke at one of SDI's events, talking about ESP's self-service system and the journey that they've come on in improving that. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the podcast, as well as some advice that Scott has for service desks looking to implement a self-service support channel. We also talked about some really exciting stuff that ESP is, dare I say, pioneering in terms of intelligent voice and video support channels. I hope you enjoy it, and if you want to hear more, please stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the inaugural SDI podcast, and I'm joined today by Scott Lake, who is Head of Global Service Desks at ESP. How are you today, Scott?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm super excited to be part of this inaugural podcast.
Yeah, well, you should be. So why don't we start by telling me a little bit about yourself, your background?
Yeah. Okay. So I am 12 years in IT. I started working for Computer Center in Barcelona in 2006 as a first-line analyst, and I didn't stay as a first-line analyst very long. I don't believe that is due to having an extraordinary technical capability, but certainly much more customer service type of person. So I moved very quickly through some different roles in reporting and change into service desk team lead and eventually service desk management, and then spent 6 years doing sort of external and internal IT service management in a variety of companies in lots of different industries. And something just always kept bringing me back to service desks. I feel like it's just where my heart is in IT. And that's what sort of brought me to my new role, Head of Global Service Desk, which is undoubtedly the most fun I've ever had in a job.
Oh, wow.
And I know it's just because of all of the challenges I had as an analyst, and now having the influence to be able to make sure my team don't go through those challenges, or we improve things for them. So that's why I'm here.
What would you say is one of the favourite parts of your job?
Ultimate power. No, I'm kidding. No, I genuinely believe I'm quite a sort of servant. So being able to help my team, undoubtedly, and watching someone grow from what could be a full 10-page personal development plan with 1,000 bullet points that we work through to what could be a simple one line of a conversation one day that I didn't think maybe had impact, and it totally changes the way somebody behaves or the way somebody works. So that's the one for me, knowing that I can add huge amounts of value to other people.
Yeah.
And if I can't add huge amounts, just try and add some value.
So that's a massive telling for your leadership skills and the culture of your company, which is definitely something we're seeing a lot more of in the industry. We're sort of moving away from this idea that service desks are just break fix, not really just a separate part of an organisation, just in a back room somewhere, to something that is really developing, and the leadership side of that is something that I'm particularly interested in. So it's good to hear that that's something that you're really enjoying and focused on.
Yeah, I am. But I feel like you can't just be people. I mean, I would be, but my CEO probably wouldn't continue to employ me. So like I'm here today at the SDI Leadership Conference to talk about emerging technology and disruptive technology like artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, natural language, chatbots, etc., and the sort of best in breed tooling that's around on the market, and how we currently exploit that to fix our challenges and meet future demand. So I feel like you have to back off the leadership against something else. Like, I find people who are just people leaders potentially like not vapid, but I feel like you need to galvanize some level of trust, and the only way to do that is be able to talk about something where your people really look up to you and get a sense of like you didn't just get where you got through nothing more than hard work, and that's something that you still do every single day to stay where you are. So I feel like it's important to have a niche. I definitely niche out in the leadership of people, but I have to learn this other stuff. in order for me to do my job in the industry I work in.
So was your role something that existed before you started there, or did you sort of move into that role and create it?
That role existed.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a chap who was doing a sort of head of service delivery and a head of service desk role.
Mm-hmm.
For a managed service provider, that's a huge hat, or too many hats, depending on which way you look at it,
A lot of hats.
to wear. Yeah, a lot of hats, too much hats. So he did my job for like 6 months and then moved on.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to come to ESP. I've only worked for, I think, 7 or 8 months, and I have done more in 7-8 months than I feel like I've done in the last 7 years, which is really exciting. I feel like on your way up through the service desk arena, you're constantly hemmed in, and not usually due to like management and leadership. It's just the constraints of the role that you work in and the output that you're required to achieve every day. So to be in a role where you have a lot more freedom to really utilize your experience, that's pretty exciting.
Cool. And do you think that your team has changed a lot, as like developed with you, with like technologies and leadership?
I mean, I feel like it's a very good fact that this is a closed format, so they can't interject. It's a really topical question. So there was a lady in our company that recently was promoted to head of service delivery, and during her interview, we talked about measurement, and she asked me a question and said, "What would you say is the most important measure for you in your success?" And I said, undoubtedly, it's the employee satisfaction survey. Like, there is nothing more important. Like, I can talk all day about SLAs, KPIs, objectives, development plans, technology roadmaps, and stuff like that. I get why it's a priority for a lot of businesses, but for me, the most important thing in my role as head of global service desks is the results of the employee survey, and have they dramatically shifted from last year. I don't think I could pick anything that would be a more important part of the role, or the most sort of part of the role that I'm enjoying.
Yeah. So at the end of last year, SDI sent out a census survey to ask our members in our community what they wanted to see from us content-wise and things like that this year. And one of the things that was in the top 5 was staffing and motivation. So obviously we've seen customer experience be a massive thing over the past few years, and it's still a massive thing. But the fact that employee experience is creeping its way up there is really positive. That's a really good thing that we're seeing. So your session is on self-service and automation, and obviously ESP's journey with that. So do you want to just talk us a bit through that a bit?
I can, yeah. Okay, so what am I talking about today? I should probably know that because it's only 2 hours away. So today is, I hope, to be quite practical. I hope this session is kind of like a challenge and a response type format. Like, we'll just play that through and give it a few different scenarios, but we are talking about self-service and how we met the challenge of increased demand of manual work, like a huge amount of email, through utilization of portal technology. We are talking about how we are able to meet a demand that I feel like most people, when they hear this, will say, okay, my job is not as demanding, because at ESP we have on some of our airports 15-minute resolution SLAs, which are from the point of responding to the call to having it fixed. So we're going to talk about how we created an application that sits on desktops that enables the user to click a few buttons and not have to make a phone call and not have to describe their problem. They literally just click and log an incident themselves. It spins out to a mobile application, and an engineer puts in the ETA and how fast they're going to get back to the user. And this solution basically enables, within sort of 30 to 45 seconds from a customer identifying they have an issue to them knowing exactly how long it will take for somebody to be at their desk fixing it, which is incredibly important for the air transport industry. And then we're going to talk about something that I feel like will hit home for a lot of people. So when we deal with third parties and vendors, we are often having to go through our service desk to get to another service desk to get to an engineer, and the chain just gets so stretched that the quality of that service is really challenging. So we will be talking about social media and how we plan to use chatbot and WhatsApp technology to circumvent. I mean, my CEO would say use the word compliment, so to complement the model of third parties. Ideally, what we're trying to do is get ourselves in touch with an engineer and take out touch points in different service desks to make our speed of response faster and ultimately resolve issues quicker for our customers. Outside of that, what else am I trying to do? I'm just going to try and add value today. Like I find it easy to talk. I want to be able to get into a conversation. That's my goal. So maybe people are listening to this right now and going, you did not do that. Those people and only those people will know that I failed massively.
Well, we only choose the highest caliber of speaker. You'll definitely be giving a lot of value today.
I feel like I should have got a t-shirt for being first on the podcast.
I will make you a t-shirt and send you it. SDI's first podcast.
Yeah.
Podcast
I'll
guest.
wear it with pride every day.
So obviously ESP have been through a lot with their self-service journey. What are some of the main tips that you would give for service desks looking to start their own journey or maybe do something with shift left or automation or something like that?
I feel like with any big conversation, the hardest part is usually the first step. So I was like driving up today thinking, how are you going to finish your talk and get a standing ovation? Which, I mean, is not going to happen. But that's where my head generally pictures my career at. And it reminded me of a quote from Les Brown, who's a motivational speaker in America. Really good, really great guy. And he has a quote that you don't need to be great to get started, but you need to get started to be great. And I thought about this at the end of my first talk for the SDI. That answered a question. Somebody said to me, how do you get started? And I feel like people want this kind of blueprint for, here you go, here's an automation, artificial intelligence and robotic process automation roadmap that you can follow. And the truth is, it doesn't exist. So you just need to get some understanding. First step is just go and get some knowledge on the subject. And you can do that by attending Service Desk Institute events. You can
nice
do
plug.
that. Yeah, thanks. That's why I'm getting the t-shirt. You can do that through, finding people on LinkedIn, through networking at events. There's so much content online around this stuff. And then it's really about kind of finding some key stakeholders around your business where you can workshop out ideas. And it's very easy to do stuff in silo. So we've created the first few of our solutions, if you like, all around service desk, much more aimed at our customer space, because that's where it's easy to get investment and return on investment, and therefore likely to get your business case approved from the CEO, etc. But the more we look at other areas of the business, we're actually finding that we're far richer opportunities with some of our finance processes, our HR processes, where people have gone digital but still almost have a very manual way of working. So you can just find so much potential and areas to exploit by just having a conversation. And sometimes you just have to be pioneering enough to sit in a room and say, we're going to talk about automation. And when somebody says, what is that? I go, I don't really know. I don't really have the answer. But here is some stuff that I've seen other companies doing. And that's why the real value of today comes into play, because you can get so much rich exposure that you can take away and start applying directly into your company. But the key takeaway is you just got to get started. Yeah. That's it.
I feel like with self-service, it came out as this sort of really cool next thing to do, and there was no real best practice or any sort of practice around it within the service desk industry. So people just implemented it where they could and didn't really know what to do, and that's why we're seeing a lot of low adoption rates and poor customer experience with the channels.
Yeah, I feel like most people really focus on the tech. So we built a portal, why don't people use it? And that's the best question to ask yourself, because you never really taught someone how to use it. You didn't think about how to use it. And I witness all day long, I'm not going to talk about my own company. Let's presume I'm talking about someone else's. But you witness things all day long where you think, okay, I see why you've done that, but what about the customer? Why didn't you speak to the customer? Or why didn't you speak to your user? A lot of companies I've worked at in the past few years rolled out Office 365, a rich suite of applications, the likes of which, the power of which we've never seen before, and then we were just supposed to run off and use them and understand how to use Microsoft Teams and Planner and all this other stuff, and nobody actually took the time to teach us. So in my company, we're massive on video. I'm quite pragmatic and an activist, so I don't really do much book learning. But I like to record videos on how to use stuff. And that's where we're taking our knowledge base next. So that instead of having to go through pages and pages of documentation, you can just watch a video and almost click through it whilst you're like live fixing an issue. So yeah, I think it's really important that you constantly think about how you want something adopted, and that's really why my talk is around benefit realization. I think a lot of people have the outcome in mind, maybe not the why, and certainly not how do I measure that this has been successful afterwards. And that's really key, when especially with self-service, because otherwise you will suffer low adoption.
Yeah. And do you think that, so these sort of tips that you've learned for self-service, do you think you could then, anytime, like say you wanted to implement a chatbot or a virtual assistant in the future, do you think you could look at your journey with self-service and be like, right, we need to do these things first? Yeah,
absolutely. I feel like, I mean, you could easily template that kind of stuff up and make it digestible to all, but it's always just going to come back to what's your organization like and how they like to work. And I've worked in some organizations where you just write a business case, get it to the right people, get it signed off, and off you go. I've worked in others where before you even think about writing a business case, you need to have a lot of conversation. People need to feel involved. And that's just about understanding the culture that you play in your own organization or in your customer space, and knowing the right way to sort of exploit that.
Yeah. So what do you think is next for service desks? Whether it's culture-based, technology framework, anything like that.
Good question.
What's the next big thing?
I feel like the next big thing, not just in the service desk space, I feel like everywhere, is audio and video. I feel like that's where we need to start playing next. If you look at the sort of rise of the podcast industry, I mean, we're here doing it. I mean, that's just one, and the speed of video, I feel like that's an area where we need to exploit next. So let me land that with a couple of examples. So number one, I just talked about, we are looking at and creating video content for our knowledge base rather than using documentation. The second one that we are looking at, and I'm totally like stealing all of my own mojo here, so I'm so glad if you listen to the podcast that you got to this moment, because you're going to get some real value add, is we are recording video of essentially a walkthrough of how to do something in our team. So training and onboarding in any service desk is a huge amount of time, and you might be like 1 month to fill a role with a good candidate and another month to get them live and operating, and in certain teams that's just going to cripple your team for a while. So the way that we want to speed up the training is to record everything so that you can almost go live and kind of live train. So if I took an email from a customer and I had to log a certain type of incident, I can play the video, I can watch how that analyst is logging that, and on my own screen I can real-time log my own incident against that video. So that's an area where I think that there's just tons of benefit. The other benefits are that we don't have to use everybody else's time up to do that training. It's sat there forever. The article doesn't really need to be updated and that kind of thing. So around voice, one of the things we're looking at for voice is a chatbot solution where back in the day, like you had the old clunky IVR, and it was, for this type of issue press 1, for this type of issue press 2. So it's kind of taking that model and sort of ramping it up for 2019 and saying, okay, well, that doesn't work from an experience point of view. What could work? And this is specific to a scenario where we get around 5,000-6,000 phone calls from airport clients every month, where we take 4 pieces of information to log the incident. So we are looking at whether or not we can exploit chatbot technology to speak to the customer, take those 4 pieces of information and log an incident and send it to an engineer without the utilization of the service desk team or analyst. So that's something that's really exciting to look at, because the way the technology works, we don't have to kind of script the customer. So we don't have to lead the customer to say specific things at certain points. Like, we will do that by asking the customer questions. But if the customer phoned up and the chatbot said, what's the issue? And the customer said, I'm at London Heathrow Airport in check-in area 2 and my bag tag printer doesn't work, then the chatbot would go, great, okay, I've logged an incident for you, because it's picked up the 4 pieces of salient information that it's required to get. And equally, if the customer said 3 of those things, the chatbot would be able to work out which one it hadn't heard and play that question back and be able to get the information. So that's really exciting. I mean, the idea of taking 6,000 phone calls out of your service desk every month is amazing. What's crazy risky about it is the experience. The minute it doesn't work, or the minute the chatbot goes wrong, we've created something that simply isn't viable and will damage our reputation and damage our customer service. So we're working with multiple partners at the moment to look at how we provision this tool, and most of them will work in a sort of threshold of like 75 to 80% confidence. And what that means is the technology, if it feels like it's 80% right, will do something. And ESP, we're really pushing that boundary and saying, well, no, for our solution, it has to be right. Like, there's no scope for it can't be right.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. Once you start playing in this space, the boundaries aren't that structured yet.
Yeah.
So it's quite an interesting time to be exploring video, and quite an interesting time to be exploring audio, because the people who are building it are simply quite flexible with how they build it.
Yeah. And obviously people's habits are changing, so the way they find their information is completely different to how it was 10, 20, 30 years ago.
This is true.
Yeah, especially with like younger audiences coming in. If I'm like want to know how to do something on Excel, I'll YouTube a video.
Me
do
too.
a YouTube.
I do this as well. I'm also like this for house improvements. I'm like a YouTube plumber and a YouTube electrician.
Had to figure out how to take tiles off a wall and then plaster the hole that I made.
I probably wouldn't do that. Like I YouTubed how to change a light bulb. I won't talk about it now, but if you could see, it was such a complicated light bulb.
How many Scots did it take to change
Just
a light bulb?
1 and 2 tries and 2 light bulbs, because I broke the first one.
Were they like the tiny little ones that you're not meant to put your fingertips on?
No, they were like expensive light bulbs. Like, I feel like they were like £9 ago.
Oh, that's not. I thought you were going to say like the £30 ones that you control with your phone.
I'm not that much of a millionaire.
I don't really care about them at the moment. But you know, power to people that want that in their house.
YouTube learning, that's the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Although we are seriously plugging YouTube right now.
And it's completely free, which is the other thing. You had things like lyndacom, I think, which was a subscription service, and they had videos for anything, any new skill you wanted. But you can just get that on YouTube, and you can get it in 1,000 different ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really cool. And your like voice activated chatbot idea, that's not something I've ever heard of before.
I'm more than aware that is pioneering.
Really?
So we solution two like next to market things, like what are we going to do next, and one of them is really around how we embed on our Mitel contact center platform the WhatsApp solution, which is a module that exists today, to contact engineers around the world and speak to them in their own local language and translate that back into English, or whatever language it needs to be translated into. That's undoubtedly a really interesting one with a lot of practical benefit. But what it doesn't do is really excite in the customer space. And one of the cool things about ESP is we really understand that innovation is the number one priority for everybody who comes to a managed service provider. They're asking for your expertise because they don't have it themselves. Otherwise, they do it themselves. Mm-hmm. So the voice solution is not on the market. Like, I know that nobody else is doing it. So that's crazy exciting. And we are moving on this now. This is something that we are solutioning and designing and looking at, what are all the component parts of making this a success.
Yeah, well, in a year or two we'll have to get you back on the podcast to tell us all about
that. I am basically hoping next year to be the recipient, along with ESP, of the most incredible automation. That's where I want to pitch it.
We'll do a special award next year just for you.
You can do that, or you can let me compete in the in whatever it is the best automation.
Yeah.
I feel like competing would be better.
Fair enough. You'd be the only entrant, but we can tell you it's a competition.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask you 2 questions before we wrap up. First of all, who, dead or alive, do you want to work with?
Oh, who do I want to work with? I mean, I would have to say Tony Robbins. Well, it's like a cross. Tony Robbins or Gary Vaynerchuk. So Tony Robbins, I'm sure you know. Tony Robbins is like the world's leading leader in philanthropy and self-development. And being somebody who niches out in the leader space, that's huge to me, to have somebody to kind of model from. Excuse me. Gary, on the other hand, Gary Vaynerchuk is just this serious guru when it comes to Facebook, Instagram, social media, digital media, and the way that marketing and advertising is moving. And he's also a speaker, but kind of doesn't want to be. So he just has a very natural way of engaging with an audience. And he's just an exceptional mind, just a really smart mind, and that's very grounded in delivery. So one of those guys.
Very intellectual answers.
Yeah.
I was expecting something a lot more.
I mean, I totally could have said like Denzel Washington, but I just don't know how I would have landed him into the SDI.
Samuel L. Jackson.
On my service
purely
desk.
For all the swearing. And finally, so SDI, our slogan is surprise, delight, and inspire. So, what inspires you?
What inspires me?
Very broad.
Oh, what inspires me? I feel like ultimately people inspire me. Like they really do. Like, and what was there was a scenario that happened to me the other day. Oh, that was it. I was driving to work. I drive down these like super dark country roads. In fact, one of them has a kind of tunnel of trees. They call it the Bat Cave. So I was at the Bat Cave. It's about halfway to work. I was at the Bat Cave Road, and there was a car that was broken down, and it was flashing its hazard lights, and it kind of looked like it was flashing its headlights too. And I was just going to drive past it like everybody else, and I stopped, and I wound my window down, and the guy looked a little frustrated, and I was like, hey, you okay? Do you need any help? And he was like, no, I'm fine, thanks very much for stopping. And I drove away, and then instantly got like, oh, that super selfish thing that you get when you're like somebody who's quite a servant. I'm like, oh, I feel nourished in my soul that I helped that guy, even though I didn't do anything. But I feel like if I did that, there's every chance it'll come back. So I feel like just being a kind human being is quite inspirational, and that's the kind of stuff that gets me going. Yeah,
that sort of put the energy out into the world, and you'll get it back.
Yeah.
See, I'm far too cautious of other people, so I'd have just driven past. I probably would end up in his boot.
It's a spooky road.
Especially if it's called the Bat Cave.
I feel like that's whoever the council is probably wouldn't approve. It's probably got a really nice name.
You never know. They might be well up for it.
Yeah.
Just submit it. This road is now Bat Cave Road.
I feel like I will take a photo of the Bat Cave Road just for you, and I'll send it to you, and then you'll know. In fact, maybe you can use it as like the image for this podcast.
Do you know what? Yes, I will. And it's a nice little spoiler alert for the rest of the podcast. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It has been an amazing inaugural podcast, and you've been a fantastic guest.
Thank you very much.